The noon sun hung merciless above Dry Creek, a town that squatted on the edge of nowhere like a buzzard on carrion. Heat waves shimmered off the packed dirt of Main Street, distorting the weathered storefronts and the figures gathered there. The air tasted of dust and sweat, tinged with the sour smell of whiskey that seeped from the saloon's swinging doors. Eliza Hartley stumbled forward, her bare feet leaving bloody prints in the dust, the rope around her waist bit deep, its coarse fibers already rubbing her skin raw through the thin fabric of her dress. Behind her, 3 men from the settlement committee pulled the rope like she was livestock headed for market. "Keep moving, woman!" Samuel Morrison, the banker's son, gave the rope a vicious tug that sent her sprawling. His face was flushed red from drink and midday heat, sweat staining the collar of his store-bought shirt. "You think you can steal from decent folk and walk free?" Eliza's palms scraped against the ground as she tried to push herself up. Her dark hair, once pinned neat, now hung in tangled strands across her face. Through the curtain of hair, her gray eyes had gone blank, focusing on some distant point beyond the jeering crowd. The townspeople lined both sides of the street like they were watching a parade. Mrs. Abigail Fletcher, the minister's wife, held her handkerchief to her nose as if poverty itself carried a stench. Young Tom Bradley, the grocer's boy, threw a clod of dirt that struck Eliza's shoulder. She didn't flinch. "Caught her red-handed," Morrison announced to the crowd, though his words slurred at the edges. "Taking bread from Henderson's store, bread that honest people pay for." Old man Henderson himself stood in his doorway, arms crossed over his apron. He said nothing, but his eyes followed the procession with the same dull interest he might show a dog fight. The second man holding the rope was Jake Colton, a ranch hand who spent more time in the saloon than on any ranch. His laugh came out harsh as crows caw. "Maybe we should brand her like cattle, teach her what happens to thieves in Dry Creek." The third man, William Tate, said little. He was new to town, eager to prove himself to the established families. His grip on the rope was uncertain, but he pulled when the others pulled, not wanting to seem weak. Eliza's dress, already worn thin from too many washings, tore at the shoulder as they dragged her past the millinery shop. The sound of ripping fabric brought fresh laughter from some in the crowd. She clutched the torn piece against herself, a gesture of modesty that seemed absurd given the circumstances. "Please," the word escaped her cracked lips, barely audible. It wasn't clear if she was asking for mercy or simply for an end to it all. "Please," Morrison mocked, his voice pitched high. "Where was please when you were stealing? Where was please when your worthless husband died and left you nothing but debts?" The mention of her husband brought the first flicker of emotion to Eliza's face. Thomas Hartley had been dead 3 months now, taken by fever. They'd been trying to start a small farm outside town, scraping together every cent. When he died, the creditors had descended like wolves. They took the land, the tools, even the seed for next year's planting. They left her with nothing but the dress on her back and a reputation as the widow who couldn't pay her debts. The procession had reached the center of town now, where the courthouse steps provided a natural stage. More people emerged from shops and houses, drawn by the commotion. Some watched with satisfaction, others with discomfort, but none stepped forward. Sheriff Dawson leaned against the jailhouse wall, his tin star catching the sunlight. His hand rested on his gun belt, but he made no move to intervene. The settlement committee had their own ways of handling things, and he'd learned it was easier to look the other way when prominent citizens were involved. "Should we take her to the jail, Sheriff?" Tate asked, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Dawson spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Don't see no crime being committed here, just citizens exercising their rights." Morrison grinned at this endorsement. He yanked the rope again, forcing Eliza to her knees in front of the courthouse. "You hear that? Even the law knows trash when it sees it." A small crowd of children had gathered, their eyes wide with the peculiar mix of fear and fascination that violence brings. Their mothers didn't pull them away. This was education. After all, this was how you learned what happened to those who stepped out of line. Eliza's hands pressed against the ground, finding stability in the earth. Blood from her feet mixed with the dust, creating dark patches that looked like shadows. Her breathing came in short gasps, but she didn't beg again. There was a terrible dignity in her silence, a refusal to give them the satisfaction of her complete breakdown. "Maybe we should parade her down to the river," Colton suggested, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Give her a bath she won't forget." Some in the crowd murmured approval. Others shifted uncomfortably. Mary Patterson, who ran the boarding house, turned away and headed back inside, but she didn't speak up. Nobody did. The sun beat down relentless, turning the scene into something from a nightmare. The dust kicked up by the crowd hung in the air like fog, coating everything with a fine layer of grit. Somewhere a dog barked, the sound sharp and accusatory. Morrison wrapped the rope around his hand for better grip. "What do you say, boys? Should we show her what Dry Creek does to thieves?" It was then that the rhythmic sound of boots on wood echoed from the boardwalk. Slow, measured steps that somehow cut through the noise of the crowd. People turned to look, and a path opened almost unconsciously. The man who emerged from the shadow of the general store was tall, his face obscured by the wide brim of his hat. Dust covered his long coat, and his spurs rang with each step. He moved with the unhurried grace of someone who'd never needed to rush in his life. The crowd knew him by sight, if not by name. Caleb Stone. He had a ranch about 10 miles out. Came to town maybe once a month for supplies. Kept to himself. Some said he'd been a soldier. Others claimed he'd ridden with outlaws. Nobody knew for certain because nobody asked. There was something about him that discouraged casual conversation. He stopped at the edge of the circle that had formed around Eliza and her tormentors. His gray eyes, cold as winter morning, took in the scene, the rope, the blood, the woman on her knees. For a long moment, nobody moved. The festive atmosphere of mob justice curdled into something else. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the instinctive wariness that comes when a predator enters a space full of scavengers. Morrison found his voice first, bravado fighting with the whiskey in his system. "This ain't your concern. Stone, just teaching a thief a lesson." Caleb's gaze shifted to Morrison. He didn't speak, just looked. Morrison's words dried up like water in the desert. The silence stretched, broken only by Eliza's labored breathing and the creak of leather as people shifted nervously. The sun seemed to burn hotter, the air growing thick and hard to breathe. When Caleb finally spoke, his voice was low, rough as sandpaper, but it carried to every ear in the crowd. "Give her to me, now!" The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down in the dust. Morrison's face darkened, the flush of drink giving way to something uglier. His grip on the rope tightened until his knuckles went white. "Now see here, Stone," he began, trying to summon the authority his father's money usually provided. "This woman's a thief. We got every right." "I said give her to me." Caleb took a single step forward. Just one step, but somehow it changed everything. The crowd seemed to pull back without actually moving, like water receding before a storm. Jake Colton laughed, but it came out forced and brittle. "You planning to pay for what she stole? That your idea of charity?" Caleb's hand moved to his coat, a gesture so casual it took a moment for people to realize what he was doing. He pulled out a leather pouch and tossed it at Henderson's feet. The coins inside clinked with unmistakable weight. "That covers the bread and anything else." His eyes never left Morrison's face. "Now drop the rope." Henderson scooped up the pouch quick as a snake, hefting it to judge its contents. His merchant's mind calculated faster than conscience. That's more than fair payment," he announced, already backing toward his store. William Tate released his section of rope immediately, stepping away with visible relief. He'd wanted to belong, but not at this price. The rope went slack in his portion, dragging in the dust. "You can't just," Morrison started, but Caleb cut him off with a look that could have frozen whiskey in July. "Boy," Caleb said, and though Morrison had 5 years on him at least, the word fit. "You got 2 choices, drop the rope and walk away, or keep holding it and we'll see what happens next." The threat wasn't spelled out. It didn't need to be. There was something in Caleb Stone's stillness that spoke louder than any bluster. This wasn't a man who made idle warnings. Sheriff Dawson pushed himself off the jailhouse wall, suddenly interested in maintaining order. "Now, everybody just calm down. Morrison, you heard the man. The debt's been paid." But Morrison was beyond reason. The whiskey, the heat, the public challenge to his authority. It all boiled over. "You think you can ride in here and tell us what to do? This ain't your town. Stone." "No," Caleb agreed. "It ain't?" He moved then, smooth and inevitable as water finding its level. Before Morrison could react, Caleb's hand closed over his on the rope. Not violent, just present, immovable. Morrison tried to pull back, but it was like trying to move a mountain. Up close, he could see the scars on Caleb's hands, the weathered lines of a man who'd known hard work and harder choices. There was no anger in those gray eyes, just a terrible patience. "Let go, son," Caleb said quietly, "while you still can." The crowd held its breath. This was the moment when violence should have erupted, when guns should have been drawn and blood spilled. That's how these things went in Dry Creek. But Morrison looked into those patient eyes and saw something that whiskey couldn't burn away. He saw his own mortality reflected there, calm and certain as sunset. His hand opened. The rope fell. Caleb nodded once, a gesture that might have been approval or dismissal. He turned his attention to Eliza for the first time since arriving. She hadn't moved during the confrontation, still kneeling in the dust like she'd forgotten how to stand, without ceremony. Caleb bent and scooped her up. She weighed nothing, bird bones and desperation. Her body went rigid for a moment, then limp, too exhausted to fight another battle. "Wait just a minute." Colton found his courage now that the immediate danger seemed past. "You can't just take her." "What if she steals again?" Caleb paused. Eliza cradled in his arms like something broken he meant to mend. When he looked at Colton, the ranch hand took an involuntary step back. "She won't steal again," Caleb said, "because she won't need to." He turned and walked toward where his horse waited, a big roan that stood patient as stone despite the commotion. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, faces a mixture of relief, disappointment, and confusion. Morrison stood there, the dropped rope at his feet like a dead snake. His face had gone from red to white to an unhealthy gray. "This ain't over, Stone," he called out, but his voice cracked on the last word. Caleb didn't respond. He settled Eliza on the saddle with surprising gentleness, then swung up behind her. She swayed, and he steadied her with one arm around her waist. The same rope that had dragged her through the dust now lay abandoned, a symbol of something the town wouldn't soon forget. "Where are you taking her?" Sheriff Dawson asked, asserting his authority now that the danger had passed. "Home," Caleb said. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that might have been mockery or simple courtesy. "Good day, Sheriff." He turned the roan and headed out of town at a walk. No hurry, no fear of pursuit. Just a man on a horse with a half-dead woman in his arms, leaving behind a crowd that didn't quite know what had just happened. The silence lasted until the sound of hoofbeats faded. Then everyone began talking at once, voices rising like disturbed crows. Mrs. Fletcher declared it a scandal. Tom Bradley asked his mother what would happen to the woman now. Morrison kicked the rope and stormed off toward the saloon, Colton trailing behind. Sheriff Dawson picked up the abandoned rope, coiling it with methodical care. He'd write this up in his report as a simple case of debt repayment. Nothing more. Easier that way. But throughout Dry Creek, in shops and homes and saloons, people would talk about the woman who'd been dragged through the streets, about the man who'd stopped it with 5 words and a handful of coins, about what happened when the established order met something it couldn't buy, threaten, or ignore. The sun continued its merciless journey across the sky. The blood in the dust was already drying, soon to be scattered by wind and forgotten, but the memory of this day would linger like smoke from a distant fire. Meanwhile, on the road leading out of town, Caleb Stone rode steady and calm. Eliza Hartley sagged against him, her body learning to trust the solid presence at her back. She didn't know where they were going, didn't know what awaited her at this stranger's home, but for the first time in 3 months, since they'd put her husband in the ground, she felt something other than despair. The road stretched ahead, dusty and long. Behind them, Dry Creek grew smaller with each step the roan took, and somewhere in that distance between what was and what might be, 2 broken people began the journey that would either save them both or destroy what little they had left. The roan's steady gait ate up the miles. Caleb said nothing, and Eliza lacked the strength for questions. The only sounds were leather creaking, hooves on hard-packed earth, and the whisper of wind through the sparse grass that bordered the trail. As Dry Creek disappeared behind a rise, Caleb allowed himself one glance back, then he faced forward again, toward home, toward whatever came next. His arm tightened slightly around Eliza's waist, keeping her secure in the saddle. She stirred at the gesture, some deep instinct recognizing safety in the midst of uncertainty. Her fingers clutched weakly at his coat sleeve, holding on to this unexpected lifeline in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty for so long. The road home had never seemed so long, or so full of possibility. The road stretched before them like a ribbon of dust, winding through sagebrush and scattered rocks. The sun had passed its zenith, throwing long shadows that danced with each movement of the horse. Caleb kept the roan at a steady walk, mindful of his passenger's condition. Eliza drifted in and out of consciousness, her body alternating between rigid tension and complete collapse. Each time she startled awake, her fingers would clutch at his coat before remembering where she was, or perhaps not remembering, just accepting this strange turn of fate. They passed no one on the road, this far from town. The land belonged to rattlesnakes and jackrabbits, hawks and the endless wind. Caleb preferred it that way, had chosen his plot specifically for its isolation, 10 miles from Dry Creek's judgment and gossip. After an hour's ride, Eliza stirred more fully. "Water," she whispered, the words scraping past her cracked lips like sandpaper. Caleb reined in the roan near a cluster of cottonwoods that promised shade. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. She tried to stand on her own, stubborn pride flaring even in her depleted state, but her legs buckled immediately. He caught her before she hit the ground, supporting her weight as he guided her to rest against a tree trunk. From his saddlebags, he retrieved a canteen and held it to her lips. She drank greedily at first, then slower as he pulled it back. "Easy," he said. "Too much too fast will make you sick." She nodded, eyes closing as she leaned back against the rough bark. In the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, he could see the full extent of the damage. Rope burns circled her waist. Her feet were torn and bleeding. Bruises in various stages of healing colored her arms. Caleb wet his bandana and handed it to her. She took it with shaking hands, dabbing at her face. The simple gesture seemed to restore some measure of dignity. "Why?" she asked finally, her gray eyes finding his. He considered the question while checking the roan's hooves for stones. Why had he intervened? He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more. Had planned to conduct his business and leave without speaking to anyone beyond necessity. "Couldn't abide it," he said finally. What they were doing. Others could. The bitterness in her voice was sharp as alkali water. They stood there watching like it was a show. He had no answer for that. People were what they were. Most would follow the crowd, afraid to stand out, afraid to stand up. He'd learned that during the war, watching good men do terrible things because everyone else was doing them too. "Can you ride further?" he asked, instead of pursuing the topic. She straightened slightly. "I'm not going back. Didn't say you were." They regarded each other in the cottonwood shade. She saw a man perhaps 35 years old, weathered by sun and wind, with hands that knew work and eyes that had seen too much. He saw a woman who'd been broken but not destroyed, holding onto pride with bleeding fingers. "You're home," she said. "Is it far?" "Another hour, maybe less." She pushed herself up using the tree for support. "Then we should go." He helped her back onto the horse, noting how she bit her lip to keep from crying out when the movement pulled at her injuries. This time, when he mounted behind her, she leaned back without resistance, accepting the support his body offered. The road continued its meandering path through increasingly rough country. The land here was all edges and angles, cut by seasonal floods and baked hard by summer sun. Sparse grass clung to life between rocks, and stunted juniper trees dotted the hillsides like sentinels. As they climbed a gradual rise, Eliza spoke again. "They said you live alone." "I do." "No wife? No family?" "No." She absorbed this information quietly. Then, "What will people say? When they find out you've taken me to your home?" "Don't much care what people say. Easy for you to say. You're a man." He couldn't argue with that. The world had different rules for men and women, especially women without the protection of money or family. She'd already paid the price for those rules. They crested the rise, and Caleb pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley below. "There," he said. "That's home." Even from a distance, the ranch looked tired. The main house leaned slightly, as if weary from fighting the wind. The barn door hung crooked, fence posts tilted at odd angles, and the few cattle visible were thin as shadows. "It ain't much," he said, surprising himself with the admission. "It's standing," she replied. "That's more than I have." They descended into the valley as afternoon shadows grew long. Up close, the neglect was even more apparent. Weeds choked what might once have been a garden. A broken wagon wheel leaned against the barn. Everything spoke of a man living alone, maintaining only what was necessary for survival. Caleb dismounted at the house and helped Eliza down. This time she managed to stay upright, though she gripped the porch railing hard enough to whiten her knuckles. "Come on," he said, pushing open the door. "Let's get those feet tended." The inside was sparse but clean. A main room served as kitchen and living space, with a bedroom visible through one doorway. Everything was functional, nothing decorative save for a single photograph on the mantel, face down. He guided her to a chair near the stove. "I'll heat water," he said. "Need to clean those cuts before they fester." While the water heated, he gathered what medical supplies he had: clean rags, a bottle of whiskey for disinfectant, some salve he used on the cattle. She watched him move about with an efficiency that spoke of long practice at self-sufficiency. "Take off the dress," he said without looking at her. "There's a shirt and pants on the bed. They'll be too big, but they're clean." She hesitated, then limped to the bedroom. Through the doorway, he heard the rustle of fabric, a sharp intake of breath as movement aggravated her injuries. When she emerged, his clothes hung on her like a child playing dress-up. She'd rolled the sleeves and trouser cuffs multiple times. The sight might have been comical, if not for the bruises visible on her throat, the careful way she moved. He had her sit again and knelt to examine her feet. The damage was worse than he'd thought. Days of walking on credit collectors' threats had already worn them raw. The dragging through town had torn them open. "This'll hurt," he warned, dipping a cloth in the whiskey. "Can't hurt worse than—" She gasped as the alcohol hit the wounds, her whole body going rigid. He worked quickly but thoroughly, cleaning each cut, applying salve, wrapping her feet in clean strips of cloth. She endured it in silence, tears streaming down her face but never making a sound. When he finished with her feet, he moved to the rope burns at her waist. These were raw and angry, already showing signs of infection. She lifted the too large shirt without being asked, holding it while he worked. "You've done this before," she observed, watching him tend the wounds with practiced care. "Cattle get tangled in wire sometimes. Same principle. Is that what I am now? One of your strays?" He paused in his work, meeting her eyes. "You're a person who needed help, nothing more, nothing less. And when I'm healed, what then?" "Then you decide what comes next." She studied his face, looking for the catch, the hidden price. In her experience, men didn't give without expecting something in return. But his expression remained neutral, focused on the task at hand. When he finished, she lowered the shirt. "Thank you," she said formally, "for everything. I'll find a way to repay you." "No need." He stood, gathering the bloodied rags. "You hungry?" She nodded, suddenly aware of the hollow ache in her stomach. When had she last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? The days had blurred together into a haze of hunger and humiliation. He heated beans and salt pork, sliced thick chunks of bread. Simple fare, but she ate like it was a feast, forcing herself to go slow despite her body's demands. He sat across from her, nursing a cup of coffee, saying nothing. As darkness fell, he lit a kerosene lamp. The yellow light threw dancing shadows on the walls, making the sparse room seem almost cozy. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the valley, their yips echoing off the hills. "You can have the bed," he said when she'd finished eating. "I'll take the floor." "I couldn't." "You could and you will. No argument." She was too tired to fight. He helped her to the bedroom, where she sank onto the mattress with a sigh that seemed to come from her bones. It wasn't soft. Nothing in this house was soft, but it was horizontal and still. "Lock the door if it makes you feel safer," he said from the doorway. She looked at him, silhouetted against the lamplight. This strange, silent man who'd pulled her from hell for reasons she didn't understand. "What's your name?" she asked. "I should know the name of the man who saved me." "Caleb Stone." "I'm Eliza Hartley." He nodded as if he'd known all along. Maybe he had. Maybe everyone in the territory knew the name of Thomas Hartley's widow, the woman who couldn't pay her debts. "Rest now," he said, and pulled the door closed. She lay in the darkness, listening to him move about in the other room. The bed smelled of him, leather and smoke and something indefinable but not unpleasant. For the first time in months, she was clean, fed, safe. The word felt foreign. Safe. She tested it carefully, like probing a sore tooth. Could she trust it? Could she trust him? Outside, the coyotes sang their wild song. Inside, Caleb Stone settled on the floor with a blanket and his own troubled thoughts. And in between, in a room that wasn't hers, in a house that wasn't home, Eliza Hartley closed her eyes and let exhaustion claim her. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, for these few hours, she could rest. Dawn came early to the valley, painting the eastern hills gold while shadows still pooled in the hollows. Eliza woke to the sound of a rooster that must have been more memory than reality. Caleb's ranch had no chickens. The sound resolved into the creak of the water pump outside. She lay still, taking inventory. Her feet throbbed but no longer burned. The rope burns at her waist had settled into a dull ache. Everything hurt, but it was the clean hurt of healing rather than fresh damage. Through the thin walls, she heard Caleb moving about. No voices, just the steady rhythm of morning chores. A man alone, used to silence. She rose carefully, wincing as her feet touched the floor. His clothes still hung loose on her frame, but they were clean and whole. In the small mirror above the washstand, she barely recognized herself. Hollowed cheeks, tangled hair, eyes that had seen too much. But alive. The main room was empty when she emerged, but coffee steamed on the stove. She poured a cup with shaking hands, the warmth a blessing against the morning chill. Through the window, she watched Caleb working with fence wire near the barn, his movements economical and sure. The house told its story in small details, a few books on a shelf, spines worn from reading, a shirt mended with careful, even stitches, everything in its place. But the places themselves spoke of absence. This was a house that had forgotten softness, forgotten the small touches that made a place home. She found a broom and began sweeping, moving carefully on her bandaged feet. It wasn't much, but she needed to do something, needed to prove she wasn't just another burden in a life that seemed to have carried enough. When Caleb came in an hour later, he stopped short at the sight of her working. "You should be resting." "I've rested." She didn't stop sweeping. "I won't be idle." He watched her a moment, then nodded. "There's eggs in the cold box, bacon too, if you're hungry." She was, desperately. But more than that, she was grateful for something to do. She cooked while he washed at the pump, and they ate in companionable silence. The eggs were fresh, probably traded from a neighbor. She wondered what he'd given in exchange. After breakfast, he showed her around the property. The barn held his horse and 2 thin milk cows, a few chickens scratched in the dirt. So there was a rooster after all. The garden plot was overrun with weeds, but she could see where vegetables had once grown in neat rows. "Used to be better kept," he said, following her gaze. "Let things slide some." "Your wife?" she asked carefully. "She tended the garden?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No wife, just used to care more about such things." She didn't press. Everyone had their ghosts. Days fell into a pattern. Caleb worked the ranch, mending fences, tending cattle, the endless tasks that kept a place running. Eliza took over the house, cleaning corners that hadn't seen attention in months, maybe years. She mended his clothes, cooked meals that used what little he had to best advantage. They spoke little, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of 2 people learning to exist in the same space without demanding more than the other could give. On the 4th day, she found the photograph on the mantel, the one that lay face down. Without thinking, she turned it over. A woman looked back at her, young and smiling, with kind eyes and dark hair pinned neat. Not a wife, he'd said. Sister, perhaps. Or someone he'd hoped would become a wife. Her name was Margaret. She startled, not hearing him enter. He stood in the doorway, face unreadable. "I'm sorry," she said, moving to put the picture down. "No." He crossed to stand beside her. "Maybe it's time it faced the room again." He took the photograph, studying it like he'd forgotten the details. "She died 3 years ago. Lung fever. Were you engaged? Going to marry that spring?" He set the picture carefully on the mantel. Standing this time. "She was the school teacher in Dry Creek, boarded with the minister's family." Eliza remembered Mrs. Fletcher's sneering face in the crowd. Had she sneered at Margaret too? This woman who'd captured Caleb Stone's carefully guarded heart. "After she died, I stopped going to town much. Easier that way." He turned from the photograph. "I've got work to do." But that evening, she noticed he glanced at Margaret's picture, not with the raw grief of fresh loss, but with the softer sadness of old sorrow. Progress, perhaps. A week passed. Her feet healed enough to walk without wincing. The rope burns faded from angry red to pink. She found an old dress in a trunk, probably Margaret's, and altered it to fit. It felt strange wearing a dead woman's clothes, but less strange than continuing in Caleb's shirts and trousers. She was hanging washing when she saw the riders approaching. 3 men, moving with the purposeful pace of those on business, her hands stilled on the clothesline. Caleb emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but held casual, barrel pointed at the ground. He positioned himself between the house and the approaching riders. "Stone," the lead rider called out. Sheriff Dawson, his star glinting in the afternoon sun. With him rode Morrison and another man she didn't recognize. "Sheriff," Caleb acknowledged. "Something I can do for you." Dawson dismounted, the others following suit. "Just checking on things. Heard you had a guest." "Is that what we're calling it?" Morrison's voice held ugly insinuation. "The whole town's talking. Stone, you can't just take a woman to live with you. It ain't proper." "Don't recall asking the town's opinion," Caleb said mildly. The 3rd man, older and bearing the soft look of a life spent indoors, cleared his throat. "Mr. Stone, I'm Judge Garrett. Perhaps we could discuss this reasonably?" "Nothing to discuss. Mrs. Hartley is here of her own will. She's free to leave when she chooses." "Is she now?" Morrison stepped forward. "Why don't we ask her ourselves?" Caleb's grip shifted on the rifle, subtle but unmistakable. "You're on my land, Morrison. Best remember that." Eliza made her decision. She stepped out from behind the washing, chin raised despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm here. Sheriff?" "What is it you need to know?" The men turned to stare. In Margaret's altered dress, with her hair pinned up and color returned to her cheeks, she looked nothing like the broken creature they dragged through town. "Mrs. Hartley," the judge said carefully. "We're concerned for your welfare. This arrangement, it's highly irregular." "My welfare?" She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Where was this concern when I was starving? When I was sleeping in doorways? When your citizens dragged me through the streets?" Dawson had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That was unfortunate, but it doesn't make this right. An unmarried woman, living with a man, working for him." She interrupted. "Mr. Stone has employed me as housekeeper. I cook, clean, tend the garden. In exchange, I have shelter and food. Is that illegal, Judge?" Garrett frowned. "Not illegal. No, but surely you understand how it looks." "I understand that appearances matter more than truth in Dry Creek. I understand that the same people who watched me bleed in the dust now claim concern for my virtue." Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I am employed here, nothing more." "Employed," Morrison sneered. "That what they're calling it these days?" Caleb took a step forward. Morrison stepped back. "You've seen she's well." Caleb said to the sheriff, "She's answered your questions. Time you were going." Dawson looked between them, clearly wanting to say more but lacking grounds. The judge was already moving toward his horse, eager to be away from this uncomfortable situation. "This ain't over," Morrison said, but he was backing toward his mount as he said it. "People are talking, Stone, saying things." "Let them talk," Caleb said. "Now get off my land." They watched the riders disappear over the rise. Only then did Eliza's shoulders slump, the strength that had carried her through the confrontation deserting her. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "Maybe." Caleb turned to look at her. "You did well, standing up to them. I'm tired of being afraid." She met his eyes. "But they're right about one thing, this arrangement. People will talk. They'll make it ugly. I told you before, I don't much care what people say. But I have to care. A woman's reputation is all she has. And mine." She gestured helplessly. "What's left of it will be destroyed completely." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "There might be another way." She waited, watching emotions flicker across his usually stoic face. When he spoke again, his words were careful, measured. "Could make it official. The employment. Draw up papers. Have them witnessed. Pay you proper wages that you could save. Give you a chance to start over somewhere else when you're ready. You'd do that." Said I would help. This is help that keeps the wolves at bay. She studied him, this strange, quiet man who'd shown her more kindness than she'd known in months. "And if I don't want to leave, when I'm ready, if I wanted to stay?" Something shifted in his expression, too quick to catch. "Then you'd stay, as long as you need." They stood there in the afternoon sun, two damaged people carefully navigating around feelings neither was ready to name. The washing flapped on the line like flags of surrender or defiance, depending on how you looked at it. "Thank you," she said finally. "For everything." He nodded, already turning back to the barn. "Better get that washing in. Looks like rain coming." She glanced at the clear sky but didn't argue. They both knew the storms they faced had nothing to do with weather. The days stretched into weeks, and the ranch settled into new rhythms. Eliza rose with the sun to start bread, her hands learning the particular temperament of Caleb's old stove. He worked the land from dawn to dusk, coming in dust-covered and weary to find meals waiting, clothes mended, small corners of neglect slowly reclaimed. They developed a language of gesture and glance. She knew when he'd had a hard day by the set of his shoulders. He could tell her mood by how she arranged the dishes on the table. Words became almost unnecessary, saved for the practical matters of running a household. One evening, she found him on the porch, whittling a piece of wood as the sun painted the hills copper and gold. Without asking, she settled on the other chair, a basket of mending in her lap. "Storm coming," he said, nodding toward clouds building on the horizon. "The washing's in." She threaded her needle, beginning work on a torn shirt sleeve. The horses, in the barn. They sat in comfortable quiet, the only sounds the whisper of his knife on wood and the soft pull of thread through fabric. The promised storm rolled in slow, lightning flickering in the distance like God striking matches. "I never thanked you proper," she said suddenly, "for the employment papers, having them witnessed." He'd taken her to the neighboring ranch, the Thorntons, where Mrs. Thornton had served as witness with barely concealed curiosity. The papers were official now, establishing her as housekeeper with modest wages that accumulated in a jar on the kitchen shelf. "No thanks needed." She set down her sewing. "There is, though. You gave me dignity back. That's no small thing." He paused in his whittling, looking at her in the gathering dusk. "You never lost it, just got buried some under all that hurt." The first drops of rain began to fall, fat and warm. They moved inside without discussion. Him to clean his rifle, her to continue sewing by lamplight. The storm built outside, but inside felt safe, contained. Later, as she headed to her room, she paused. "What were you carving?" He held up the piece of wood. It was taking shape as a hair comb, simple but elegant. "Thought you might need one. Your other is missing teeth." She took it, running her fingers over the smooth wood. Such a small thing, but it made her throat tight. When had anyone last made something just for her? "It's beautiful," she managed. He ducked his head, uncomfortable with the praise. "Ain't finished yet." That night she lay listening to the rain on the roof, holding the half-carved comb. In the morning, she'd pin her hair up with her broken comb as always, but knowing this one was taking shape, created by calloused hands in quiet evening hours, made something warm bloom in her chest. The storm passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. Eliza attacked the garden with new energy, clearing weeds and turning soil. She found seeds in the barn, forgotten in a corner, and planted what she could. Rows of possibilities stretching toward the horizon. Caleb watched from the corral as she worked, bent over the earth like a prayer. When she straightened, pushing hair back from her face and leaving a streak of dirt, she caught him looking. He turned away quick, but not before she saw something soft in his expression. That afternoon, she walked to the small cemetery on the hill behind the house. She'd noticed it before, but never visited. 3 graves marked with wooden crosses. The newest read, "Margaret Ann Foster, beloved teacher, 1,832 to 1,871 inches. She knelt, pulling weeds that had grown up around the marker. "I'm wearing your dress," she said quietly. "Hope you don't mind. I'll take good care of it." The wind whispered through the grass, and for a moment she felt less like an intruder and more like a caretaker of something precious. When she returned to the house, she found a small package on the kitchen table, brown paper tied with string. Inside, a length of blue ribbon, store-bought and finer than anything she'd owned in years. Caleb came in as she held it up to the light. "Thought, well, your hair, the color would suit." She touched the ribbon like it might disappear. "You went to town?" "Needed supplies." He shifted, uncomfortable. "It's nothing. Just saw it and thought." "It's not nothing." She clutched the ribbon tight. "It's everything." That evening, she wore the ribbon braided through her hair. He noticed, she could tell by the way his eyes lingered, but neither spoke of it. Some things were too fragile for words. The next weeks brought a gentle routine. She learned he liked his coffee black as tar, that he read the same handful of books over and over, that sometimes he stood at Margaret's grave just before dawn. He learned she hummed while cooking, that thunderstorms made her restless, that she saved every penny of her wages like a drowning person clutches driftwood. One morning, she found him in the barn, studying a cow that lay on its side, breathing labored. "Calf's turned wrong," he said. "Been trying to help her, but..." She knelt beside him, seeing the exhaustion in his face. He'd been here all night. Without thinking, she placed her hand on his shoulder. He went still under her touch. "What can I do?" He looked at her, surprised. "You don't have to." "I want to help. Tell me what to do." Together they worked through the morning, her holding the cow's head, speaking soothing nonsense while he fought to turn the calf. When it finally came, Wet and bawling, but alive. They both sagged with relief. "You did good," he said, watching the cow clean her baby. "Real good." She was covered in sweat and other things. Hair escaped from its pins, but the way he looked at her made her feel beautiful. "We did good," she corrected. He smiled then. A real smile that transformed his weathered face. "Yeah, we did." That night, she couldn't stop thinking about that smile, about the warmth of his shoulder under her hand, about the way we had felt in her mouth, like a promise or a prayer. She was falling in love with him. The realization hit like cold water. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was his employee, nothing more. He'd been clear about that. The arrangement protected them both from gossip, gave her a chance to save money and start over. But her traitorous heart didn't care about practical arrangements. She began watching him differently, the way morning light caught in his hair, how gentle his hands were with the animals despite their size and strength, the careful way he maintained Margaret's grave, love and loss worn smooth by time. Did he notice the change? Sometimes she caught him looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Once, passing in the narrow hallway, they brushed against each other and both froze, caught in a moment that stretched like taffy before she fled to her room. The money in the jar grew slowly, enough now to leave if she wanted, enough to start over in another town where nobody knew her shame. She could go to California, maybe, or Oregon, places where the past mattered less than the future. But each night she looked at the jar and thought, not yet, just a little longer. One evening, a rattlesnake got into the henhouse. She heard the commotion and grabbed a hoe, not thinking, just reacting. By the time Caleb arrived, she stood panting over the dead snake, chickens squawking indignantly around her. "You killed it," he said, something like wonder in his voice. "It was after the hens." She tried to steady her breathing. "Couldn't let it have them." He took the hoe from her trembling hands. Most women would have screamed and run. "I'm not most women." "No," he said quietly. "You're not." They stood there in the lamplight, something shifting between them like the earth settling after a quake. Then he stepped back, coiling the dead snake to dispose of it. "Better check the walls for holes." "Don't want another getting in." But she saw his hands shake slightly as he worked, and her own heart hammered a rhythm that had nothing to do with the snake. That night she lay awake thinking about leaving. It would be easier to go now, before whatever was building between them demanded acknowledgement, before she risked her heart completely on a man who still kept his first love's photograph on the mantel. But morning came and she started the coffee, made the biscuits, took her place in the rhythms of this life. She watched him ride out to check the cattle and knew she was fooling herself. She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The blue ribbon was soft between her fingers as she braided her hair. A small beauty in a hard world. Outside, the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold and green where her garden grew. The trouble started on a market day in late September. Eliza had convinced Caleb she should go to town for supplies. The ranch needed things only the general store could provide, and she knew better than he what the kitchen lacked. "I'll be fine," she'd insisted when he'd frowned at the idea. "It's been months. Surely people have found something else to gossip about." But she'd been wrong. The moment she stepped into Henderson's store, conversations died like flames doused with water. "Mrs." Fletcher was examining fabric at the counter, and her face went rigid with disapproval. "Well," the minister's wife said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "I suppose anyone's money is good enough these days." Eliza kept her chin high, moving through the store with her list. Salt, flour, thread. Necessary things. She wouldn't be driven out by whispers and cold shoulders, but the whispers followed her. "Living in sin," someone muttered. "Poor Margaret must be rolling in her grave," said another. "Always knew she was trash." At the counter, Henderson took her money without meeting her eyes, counting her change like it might be contaminated. She gathered her purchases and turned to find Morrison blocking her path. "Mrs. Hartley." He said her name like it tasted bad. "How's life treating you out at the Stone place?" Well enough. She tried to step around him, but he moved with her. Bet it is. Clever of you, getting your hooks into him when he was feeling charitable. His breath stank of whiskey, though it wasn't yet noon. Course, a man's charity only stretches so far. What happens when he gets tired of you? Excuse me. She pushed past him, but his hand caught her arm. Don't you walk away from me. You cost me face in this town, made me look weak. She yanked free. You did that yourself. His face darkened, and for a moment she thought he'd strike her right there in the store. Then Sheriff Dawson's voice cut through the tension. Problem here? Morrison stepped back. Just having a conversation with Mrs. Hartley. Dawson looked between them, then nodded to Eliza. Ma'am, best be getting back. Storm's coming in. She fled, aware of eyes following her to the door. Outside, she found more trouble waiting. A group of ranch hands lounged against the hitching posts, including Jake Colton. Look, boys, it's Stone's woman. Colton spat tobacco juice near her feet. Heard tell he's paying you wages. Must be some special services to earn that kind of consideration. The others laughed. Heat flooded her face, but she kept walking. They followed, boots loud on the boardwalk. What's your hurry? We're just being friendly. One of them moved to block her path. Maybe you could be friendly too. Stone don't have to know. Let me pass. Or what? You'll tell your keeper. Colton moved closer. Maybe it's time someone reminded you what happens to women who forget their place. Fear crawled up her spine, cold and familiar. The street had emptied. Townsfolk suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere. Just like before. No one would help. Then she heard it, the distinctive sound of Caleb's wagon. He rounded the corner, took in the scene with one glance, and pulled the horses to a stop. He didn't speak, just climbed down slow and deliberate. Colton. His voice was flat as winter ice. You got something to say? Colton's bravado wavered. Just talking to your woman. Stone. No harm in talking. She's not my woman. She's my employee. And right now, she's trying to go about her business. Caleb stepped closer. You preventing that? The ranch hand spread out slightly, and Eliza saw Caleb's hand drop casual to his gun belt. Not threatening, just ready. 5 of us, Stone, one of them said. You really want to push this? 6, a new voice said. Tom Thornton, from the neighboring ranch, stepped out of the blacksmith's shop, though I doubt it'll take 2 of us. The odds shifted, and with them, the mood. Colton forced a laugh. Hell, we were just funning. No need for everyone to get worked up. They dispersed like roaches when a lamp's lit, leaving ugly promises in their wake. Caleb loaded her purchases into the wagon while Thornton watched their backs. Appreciate it, Tom, Caleb said. Don't like bullies. Thornton tipped his hat to Eliza. Ma'am, you need anything out at your place, you let us know. As they drove out of town, Eliza's hands shook in her lap. They won't let it be, will they? They'll keep pushing until... Until what? Until you have to kill someone. Or they kill you. The words came out raw. I won't have blood spilled over me. He was quiet for a long moment. Might not come to that. But it might. He couldn't deny it. That evening, she barely touched her supper. Caleb noticed but didn't push. After the dishes were done, she found him on the porch, that same piece of wood in his hands. The comb was nearly finished now, delicate teeth carved with patient skill. I should leave, she said to the darkness beyond the porch. It would be better. Better for who? For you? For your reputation? For your safety? What about for you? She laughed. Bitter. Does that matter? He set down the wood and knife. It's the only thing that matters. How can you say that? They hate me. They'll destroy you for harboring me. Let them try. Caleb? No. He stood, facing her in the dim light. You think I care what those people say? You think their opinion means more to me than... He stopped, jaw clenched. Then what? She whispered. He turned away. Then doing what's right. But she'd heard what he didn't say. Seen it in the way his hands fisted at his sides. The distance between them suddenly felt too vast and too small all at once. It's not just about right anymore, is it? She stepped closer. Caleb, what are we doing? I don't know. The admission seemed torn from him. I told myself I was just helping, being decent, but, he faced her then, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. But I watch for you in the mornings. Listen for your humming. Notice when you wear that ribbon, and I think about what it would be like if things were different, if you weren't working for me, if I hadn't promised to keep things proper. His voice roughened. If I was free to tell you that when Morrison touched you today, I wanted to break his hand. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Caleb, I know. He stepped back, rebuilding walls with visible effort. I know it can't be. You deserve better than a broken-down rancher with more past than future. You deserve a fresh start somewhere clean. What if I don't want clean? The words surprised them both. What if I want this, want... She couldn't say it. Not yet, but he heard it anyway. Eliza. Her name on his lips was prayer and plea combined. Don't, please don't. Why? Because I'm not strong enough. The confession came raw. Because if you say what I think you're about to say, I won't be able to do the right thing anymore. They stood frozen, balanced on a knife's edge. Then a coyote howled in the distance, breaking the spell. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. I'll start looking for positions elsewhere, she said quietly. It's time. He nodded, though something died in his eyes. If that's what you want, it's what's best. But as she lay sleepless that night, she wondered who she was trying to convince. The walls between them had cracked, letting light shine through. And in that light, she'd seen a future she wanted more than safety, more than a fresh start. She'd seen home, outside her window. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Change was coming whether they wanted it or not. The only question was whether they'd weather it together or apart. In his room, Caleb held the finished comb, running his thumb over the smooth wood. He'd carved it thinking of her hair in the lamplight, of her courage with the snake, of the way she'd said "we" like it was the most natural thing in the world. Tomorrow he'd give it to her, a parting gift. Maybe something to remember him by when she left for that fresh start she deserved. But tonight, he allowed himself to imagine another ending, one where she stayed, where he was brave enough to offer more than employment, where the photograph on the mantel shared space with new memories. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was coming fast. The storm broke just after midnight, violent and sudden. Rain hammered the roof like fists, and lightning turned the world white in flashing moments. Eliza lay rigid in her bed, bags packed by the door, trying to convince herself leaving was right. Thunder shook the house, and she heard something else, the panicked screaming of horses. She flew from bed, not bothering with shoes, and found Caleb already heading for the door. "Lightning hit the barn," he shouted over the storm. They ran together through the driving rain. Smoke poured from the barn's east corner where flames licked despite the downpour. The horses were trapped, their terror a living thing in the night. "I'll get the roan," Caleb yelled. "You open the far stall. Let the others out." She didn't hesitate. The smoke was thick, choking, but she found the stall latches by feel. The horses nearly trampled her in their rush to escape, but she pressed against the wall, counting as they fled. 3. Where was the 4th? "Eliza!" Caleb's voice, urgent through the smoke. She found him struggling with the roan, who'd tangled himself in his panic. Together they freed the horse, driving him out into the rain. But Caleb turned back. "The hay store," he said. "If it catches." "No!" She grabbed his arm. "It's not worth it." He looked at her, rain streaming down his face, something wild in his eyes. "Everything I have is in this place. Not everything," she said fierce. "Please, Caleb, please." For a heartbeat, they stood frozen. Then he nodded, and they retreated to safety as the fire claimed the barn despite the rain's efforts. They stood in the downpour, watching months of hay and feed go up in smoke. Without it, He'd have to sell off most of the cattle. Maybe the ranch itself. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly hear over the storm. But he pulled her against him, arms tight around her shaking form. "You're safe," he said into her hair. "That's all that matters." When dawn came gray and sullen, the barn was a blackened skeleton. They salvaged what they could, tools mostly. A few bags of grain the fire hadn't reached. The horses huddled in the corral, traumatized but alive. Eliza made coffee while Caleb assessed the damage. When he came in, his face was grim. "Bad?" she asked. "I can rebuild the structure, but the hay, the feed," he slumped at the table, "won't make it through winter without selling the herd. The money in the jar—" "No." His refusal was immediate. "That's yours." "Caleb." I said no. You earned that fare. It's your chance at something better. She set down her cup hard enough to slosh coffee. "Stop it." He looked up, startled. "Stop deciding what's best for me. Stop pushing me away for my own good." She was trembling, but not from cold. "I choose where I go. I choose what matters. And I choose—" A knock at the door interrupted her. They found Tom Thornton on the porch, his wagon loaded with lumber. "Saw the smoke last night," he said. "Figured you'd need help rebuilding." Throughout the morning, others arrived. The Wilsons from upstream, the Perrys from the Eastern Valley. Even cranky old Weber brought tools and strong sons. People Caleb had helped over the years, repaying kindness without being asked. They raised the frame by sunset, working together like a barn raising from earlier times. The women brought food, setting up tables in the yard. Children ran between the workers, carrying water and nails. Eliza worked alongside them, and slowly the ice began to thaw. Mrs. Wilson asked about her garden. Mrs. Perry admired the neat stitches in Caleb's shirts. They included her careful, testing her acceptance of their overtures. As evening fell, she found herself beside Mrs. Thornton, washing dishes. "Tom told me what happened in town," the older woman said quietly, "with Morrison and those men." Eliza tensed. Some of us don't hold with such behavior. Mrs. Thornton dried a plate with deliberate care. "Maybe we've been too quiet about that, too willing to let the loudest voices speak for all." "Why now?" Eliza asked. "What's changed?" Mrs. Thornton looked to where Caleb worked with the men, laughing at something Tom had said. "We've watched him these 3 years. How he withdrew after Margaret died. How he stopped coming to socials, stopped smiling." She turned back to Eliza. "Then you came, and we see how he looks at you, how he started living again instead of just existing." Eliza's throat tightened. We're not—" "Aren't you?" Mrs. Thornton smiled. "Child, that man would tear down the mountains for you. And from what I saw today, working beside him to save what you could, I'd say the feeling's mutual." The neighbors departed at full dark, promises to return tomorrow on their lips. Eliza and Caleb stood in the yard, looking at the new frame stark against the stars. "Good people," she said. "The best." He was quiet a moment. "What were you going to say? Before Tom came?" "You choose." Her bag still waited by her bedroom door. Her saved wages sat in the jar. The road out was clear. Nothing stopping her from that fresh start everyone said she deserved. "I choose this," she said simply. "I choose you." He turned to her, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Eliza, I know all the reasons I shouldn't. I know what people will say. I know it won't be easy." She stepped closer. "But I also know I'd rather face hard times with you than easy ones alone. You deserve better. A man with prospects. A future." She pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping the familiar litany. "I'm not a child, Caleb Stone. I know what I'm choosing. The question is, do you want me to stay?" His hands came up to frame her face, work rough and gentle. "Want?" His laugh was shaky. "I want you like drought wants rain, like winter wants spring, but wanting and having can be the same thing." She finished. "If we're brave enough." He kissed her then, there in the yard with the sawdust in their hair and ash on their clothes. It was desperate and tender and tasted of promises too long denied. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. He rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. God help me, but stay. Yes. That night, she unpacked her bags, put her saved wages toward buying new livestock, hung her few dresses beside his shirts in the wardrobe. They didn't share a bed. Some proprieties still held. But when nightmares of smoke and flame woke her, she found him keeping watch on the porch. She joined him there, wrapped in a quilt, neither needing words. "What happens now?" she asked as dawn approached. "We rebuild. We work the land. We face whatever comes." He pulled her closer. "Together. Morrison won't give up easy. Neither will his faction in town. No, but did you see today? We're not as alone as we thought." She thought of Mrs. Thornton's words, of neighbors showing up without being asked. Maybe the world could still surprise them with kindness. "I love you," she said, the words escaping like birds taking flight. "I didn't mean to. Tried not to, but I do." He turned her in his arms, kissing her with a reverence that made her eyes burn. "I love you too. Have for months. Maybe since the day you stood up to that rattlesnake?" She laughed, watery but real. "That's what did it? The snake?" "That's what made me admit it." He tucked her head under his chin. "You were magnificent, fierce, and I thought, this is a woman who'll stand her ground, come what may, even against the whole town. Especially then." His arms tightened. "We'll face them together, make them see what I see, what the Thorntons see, that you're not what they named you, you're so much more." The sun rose over the blackened barn frame, but also over the new timber waiting to be raised. Destruction and rebuilding, endings and beginnings, all tangled together like their hearts. Inside, the finished comb lay on the kitchen table where he'd left it. When she saw it, she smiled through tears, understanding the gift for what it was, not goodbye, but hello, not an ending, but a promise of all the small beauties yet to come. October arrived with frost on the grass and change in the air. The new barn stood complete, filled with hay the neighbors had shared from their own stores. The garden had yielded enough to see them through winter, and 3 new calves promised growth come spring. But it was the change between Caleb and Eliza that mattered most. They moved around each other with new awareness, hands brushing as they passed, glances holding longer than before. The ranch had become their world, safe from the judgment that waited in town. Yet they couldn't hide forever. "We need supplies," Eliza said one morning, checking their dwindling stores. "And I need fabric if I'm to make winter clothes." Caleb set down his coffee. "I'll go. We'll go." She met his protective gaze steady. "I won't be run out of town by small-minded people." "Eliza." "No, we face this together. Remember?" So they hitched the wagon and made the journey to Dry Creek, her hand finding his on the seat between them. The town looked smaller somehow, less threatening in the clear autumn light, but the whispers started the moment they appeared. Groups of women pulled their children close as they passed. Men lounged against buildings, watching with unfriendly eyes. At Henderson's store, they found their path blocked by Morrison and a cluster of his supporters, including Colton and several prominent townsmen. Well, Morrison's voice carried loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Look who's brave enough to show their faces, the fallen woman and her keeper." Caleb's hand moved toward his gun, but Eliza touched his arm. "We're here for supplies. Nothing more." "Supplies?" "Mrs." Fletcher emerged from the millinery shop, face twisted with righteous anger. "You dare walk these streets like a decent woman, after living in sin all these months?" "I've done nothing wrong," Eliza said clear and strong. "I work for Mr. Stone. I keep his house and tend his land. If that's sin in your eyes, perhaps you need to read your Bible more carefully." "Don't you dare lecture me about the Bible." "Mrs." Fletcher's voice rose shrill. "Everyone knows what you are, what you're doing out there." "And what is that exactly?" Caleb's voice was dangerously quiet. "What is it you think you know?" Morrison stepped forward. "We know she's corrupted you, Stone, turned you from a decent man into this. Margaret would be ashamed." The mention of Margaret's name in Morrison's mouth was like a match to dry kindling. Caleb moved so fast Morrison had no time to react, finding himself slammed against the store wall with Caleb's forearm across his throat. "Say her name again." Caleb growled. "Give me a reason." "Caleb, no!" Eliza pulled at his arm. "This is what they want. Don't give them the satisfaction." For a moment, violence hung thick in the air. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." Reverend Patterson, the minister, stood at the edge of the crowd. Unlike his wife, his face showed thoughtful concern rather than condemnation. "Let him go, Mr. Stone." Slowly, Caleb released Morrison, who stumbled away, gasping. The Reverend moved between them, hands raised for peace. "This has gone far enough," Patterson said, addressing the crowd. "We're meant to be a Christian community. Where's our compassion? Our forgiveness?" "Forgiveness," his wife sputtered. "For her kind. Especially for her kind," the Reverend said firmly. "Or have you forgotten Mary Magdalene, the woman at the well? Christ himself dined with those society rejected." An uncomfortable murmur ran through the crowd, but Mrs. Fletcher wasn't done. "She's living with him unmarried. It's scandalous." "Then perhaps," the Reverend said slowly, looking between Caleb and Eliza, "we should remedy that situation." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eliza felt Caleb go still beside her. "Are you offering—" "Reverend?" Caleb asked, voice carefully neutral. "I am." Patterson smiled slightly. "That is, if the lady is willing." All eyes turned to Eliza. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. A proposal born of defiance rather than romance, in front of people who hated her rather than those who wished her well. But then she looked at Caleb, saw the question in his eyes that went deeper than propriety or reputation, saw love there and hope and a future worth fighting for. "I'm willing," she said, soft but clear. Caleb took her hand, right there in front of everyone. "Then name the time. Reverend, we'll be there." "This Sunday," Patterson said immediately, after morning service. "Let's not give gossip more time to fester." Mrs. Fletcher made a strangled sound. "You can't mean to marry them in our church." "It's God's church," her husband corrected. "And I believe he'd approve." Morrison found his voice. "This is a mistake. Reverend, you're sanctifying sin." "I'm sanctifying love," Patterson replied, "something this town could use more of." The crowd began to disperse, unsure how to handle this unexpected turn. Some muttered darkly, but others looked thoughtful. A few of the women who'd been kind during the barn raising nodded approval. Caleb and Eliza completed their shopping in tense silence, then headed home. Neither spoke until they were well clear of town. "That's not how I meant to do it," Caleb said finally. "Do what?" "Ask you, propose. I had it planned different." He pulled the wagon to a stop. Turning to face her, "You deserve better than being pushed into marriage to shut up gossips." "Is that why you agreed? To shut them up?" "No." He cupped her face in his hands. "I agreed because when the Reverend offered, all I could think was, yes. Because I want you as my wife more than I want my next breath. But you should have courting, romance, time to be sure." "Caleb Stone, I've been sure since the night of the fire." "Maybe before." She covered his hands with hers. "This isn't how I imagined it either, but I don't need grand gestures. I just need you." He kissed her there on the empty road, pouring all the words he couldn't say into the touch. When they parted, both were breathless. "Sunday, then?" he asked. "Sunday." The days passed in a whirlwind. Mrs. Thornton arrived with her daughters, armed with fabric and determination. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," she declared, and set about altering one of her own dresses for Eliza. Tom Thornton took Caleb to town for a proper suit, ignoring the stares and whispers. The Wilsons promised food for a small reception. Even old Weber offered his fiddle for music. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Eliza stood before the small mirror, hardly recognizing herself in the borrowed dress of soft blue wool. The wooden comb Caleb had carved held her hair in place, woven through with the blue ribbon he'd given her months ago. "You're beautiful," Mrs. Thornton said softly, "He won't be able to breathe when he sees you." The church was fuller than usual, curiosity bringing out those who rarely attended. The front pews held their allies, the Thorntons, Wilsons, Perrys, and others who'd chosen kindness over judgment. The back held Morrison's faction, faces sour with disapproval. But Eliza saw none of them once Caleb appeared at the altar. He wore his new suit awkwardly but with dignity, his face transformed by joy. When their eyes met, the rest of the world fell away. She walked to him alone, no father to give her away, no family to stand witness. But as she moved down the aisle, Mrs. Thornton rose, then Mrs. Wilson, then others, creating an honor guard of women who'd learned to see past rumor to truth. Reverend Patterson performed the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When he asked if any objected, Morrison stirred in his pew but subsided at a sharp look from Sheriff Dawson. "Do you, Caleb, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice rang clear and certain. "Do you, Eliza, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." No hesitation. No doubt. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed to scattered applause and more than a few disgruntled mutters, but neither cared. They had won something greater than acceptance. They had claimed their right to love despite the world's opinion. The reception at the ranch was small but joyful. Weber played his fiddle with surprising skill. Children ran between the tables' misses. Wilson had set up. Even some townspeople who'd been neutral appeared, curiosity overcoming caution. As sunset painted the sky, Caleb and Eliza stood on their porch, watching their guests depart. She still wore the blue dress. He still fidgeted with his collar, but they were different people than they'd been that morning. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "None." She leaned into his warmth. "You? Only that it took so long to get here." They went inside together, to the house that was now truly home. The photograph of Margaret still sat on the mantel, but beside it now was a small wooden heart Caleb had carved, with the date of their wedding etched deep. "She would have liked you," Caleb said, seeing Eliza's glance. "Would have been happy for us." "I hope so. I like to think love recognizes love, even across loss." That night, as man and wife, they discovered that love born in hardship burned brightest, that two broken people could create something whole, that sometimes the greatest rebellions were acts of tenderness in a harsh world. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, but inside was warmth and light and the promise of all the seasons to come. They had chosen each other in the face of scorn, had built something beautiful from ashes and pain. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. Not what the town said, not what they'd lost along the way, but what they'd found in each other. Love in the Wild West wasn't soft or easy. It was work-worn hands holding gentle. It was standing together against the storm. It was choosing hope when the world offered none. It was a wooden comb and a blue ribbon, a shared glance across a crowded room, a promise made not in spite of hardship, but because of it. It was theirs. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of love and courage from America's frontier. What did you think of Eliza and Caleb's journey? Share your thoughts. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow lovers of Western romance.